The world is ash and iron. For Kess, it has always been this way. Every cycle begins, not with the sunrise, but with the shriek of a klaxon that tears through the smog-choked dormitories. There is no dawn here, deep in the bowels of the Hive city. There is only the Manufactorum. The air is a physical thing, a thick, metallic soup that coats your tongue and clings to the back of your throat. It tastes of rust, burnt oil, and the faint, acrid temps of ozone. It's a taste Kess has known his entire life, the only flavor he can recall besides the nutrient paste they call sustenance. The noise is constant, a symphony of damnation, the rhythmic, earth-shaking slam of industrial presses, the high-pitched whine of overworked machinery, the hiss of superheated steam from ruptured pipes. It's a sound that burrows into your bones, that you can still hear in the precious few moments of quiet, a phantom echo in your skull. He stands at his station on the assembly line, a place he has occupied for more cycles than he can count. His hands, scarred and calloused, move with an economy born of endless repetition. He attaches the final focusing lens to a lascon casing, his fingers nimble despite their thickness. The movements are automatic, drilled into him by pain and fear. There's no room for thought, no space for distraction. Distraction means a mistake, and a mistake means punishment. The overseers drift through the gloom. They are not entirely men. Cold, blue optics glow where their eyes should be, their limbs replaced with gleaming chrome and hydraulic pistons. Servitors. Mind-wiped husks of men and women who failed the machine, now remade to enforce its will. They don't speak in words, but in harsh, grating vox bursts that cut through the industrial din. In criasi tempo, subioptimau, outputi, detected. Worker Unit 734, deviation noted. Kess once saw a man next to him, his name long forgotten, fumble a power cell. It slipped from his greasy fingers and clattered to the grated floor. Before the man could even bend to retrieve it, a servitor was upon him. A crack of an electro-prod, a scream swallowed by the factory's roar, and the man was dragged away. He never returned. They all know the stories. The ones who are slow, the ones who break. They are rendered down. Their flesh and bone become another resource for the insatiable machine. Nothing is wasted in the Above, suspended in the perpetual twilight, servo skulls hover like metallic vultures. Their red optical lenses sweep across the endless rows of workers, recording every movement, every flicker of an eyelid. They are the all-seeing eyes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the silent judges of their labor. Kess has no memory of a blue sky, no concept of sunlight. His sun is the incandescent glare of molten slag being poured into casts, a searing white-orange light that throws monstrous shadows against the corroded walls. His stars are the glowing red eyes of the skulls that watch from the darkness above. This is life, a cog in a machine so vast it defies comprehension, a slave to a god he has never seen, serving an empire he will never know. His world is a cage of steel and smoke, a place where hope is a foreign word and the only certainty is the next shift. The klaxon will sound, the line will move, and Kess will work. He will attach the lens, pass the casing on, and take the next one. He is a part of the rhythm, a beat in the heart of the great machine. Ash and iron. That is all there is. That is all there ever will be. For Kess, memory is a luxury he can't afford. Trying to remember a life before this, a time before the endless noise and the metallic tang of the air, is like trying to grasp smoke. There are no parents, no childhood, only the harsh indoctrination of the scholar workhouse. He was given a number, a station, and a purpose: to serve the Emperor and the Omnissiah through tireless labor. His identity is etched, not in his mind, but in the barcode tattooed on his neck. Today, the heat is worse. The colossal furnaces are running hotter, churning out promethium-fueled fire to forge the armor plates for a distant, holy war. Sweat slicks Kess's body, pasting his threadbare overalls to his skin. It trickles into his eyes, stinging with the pollutants. It carries. He blinks it away, his focus unwavering. A moment of blurred vision could mean a crushed finger, a severed hand. The machine does not care for the weakness of flesh. It only demands its due. He glances down the line, a sea of shaved heads and gaunt faces, each one a mirror of his own exhaustion. They are ghosts in the machine, their humanity stripped away layer by layer with each passing cycle. Some have the vacant, thousand-yard stare of those who have already broken. Others, the newer ones, still have a flicker of defiance in their eyes, a spark that the Manufactorum has not yet extinguished. Kess knows that spark will die. The factory is patient. It grinds everyone down eventually. He feels a vibration through the floor, a deep, resonant shudder that is different from the usual rhythm of the presses. A new machine is being brought online, a monstrous contraption of gears and pistons that groans like a dying beast. The servitor overseers crackle with static-less orders, their electroprods sparking as they herd workers towards the behemoth. They need more hands, more sacrifices for the new altar of industry. Kess keeps his head down, his movements precise, fluid, become invisible. Do not draw attention. This is the first and most important rule of survival. He fits another lens, his knuckles grazing the hot metal of the lasgun casing. The small, sharp pain is a welcome sensation, a reminder that he is still alive, that his nerves can still feel something other than the dull ache of fatigue. The air shimmers with heat haze. He can see the distorted figures of his fellow workers, their forms wavering as if they are already fading into memory. Is this all he is? A pair of hands, a strong bike, a disposable component in the Emperor's grand design. The thought is dangerous. A crack in the carefully constructed wall of his obedience. He shoves it down, back into the dark recesses of his mind where such heresies belong. To think is to deviate. To deviate is to be purged. The cycle ends, as it began, with the scream of a klaxon. The machines wind down with a chorus of groans and sighs, but the silence that follows is not peaceful. It is heavy, expectant, filled with the wheezing coughs of 1,000 workers and the hum of the ever-present servos. Kess shuffles with the crowd towards the nutrient dispensers, a gray paste plopping into his metal tray. It's warm, tasteless, but it's fuel. It will give him the strength to face another cycle. As he eats, he stares at his reflection in the polished surface of the table. A stranger with hollow eyes and a grim-set jaw stares back. There is no trace of the boy he might have been. Only the man the Manufactorum has made. He finishes his meal, returns his tray, and shuffles towards the dormitories. They will sleep, but he will not rest. In his dreams, the machines will still be running. The noise will never stop. The world is ash and iron, and he is a prisoner within it. For now, in the heart of the Imperium, under the sterile, ever-present glow of the synth sun, there is no dawn, no dusk, only cycles. The work cycle, the sustenance cycle, the sleep cycle. And for me, Unit for 7K, there is only the hum of the recycler, the hiss of pneumatic doors, and the rhythmic clang of my labor. I am a cog, one of millions, our existence measured not in years, but in output quotas. We have no names, only designations. My designation is etched onto a small metal plate riveted to the collar around my neck. 47K kilo. A sound. Not a name. It tells my overseers which barracks I sleep in, which nutrient paste I am allotted, and which workstation I am chained to. It tells them everything they need to know. It tells me nothing. For as long as I can remember, this has been my reality. The cold floor of the barracks, the identical gray jumpsuits, the blank faces of the other units. We don't speak, not really. We communicate in grunts and gestures, a language born of efficiency and exhaustion. Words are a luxury, and in the Imperium, luxuries are liabilities. But lately, a word has taken root in my mind. A word that is not a command, not a number, not a technical term from the machinery manuals. The word is before. Before. It's a ghost, a whisper in the silent scream of the forge. It comes to me in the brief moments between sleep and waking, or when my hands are performing a task so repetitive they move on their own. Before. What? Before the collar, before the designation, before the endless gray. The question is a splinter in my consciousness, small but persistent. When I look at my hands, calloused and stained with grease, I wonder if they ever did anything else. Did they hold something soft? Did they feel the warmth of another's touch? Or have they always been tools? Extensions of the Imperium's will. I see it in the others. 2. A flicker in the eyes of Unit 1 to be as she sorts scrap metal. A momentary pause that has no place in the relentless rhythm of our work. A slight tremor in the hand of 88F. As he receives his nutrient paste, his gaze, distant, lost. Are they thinking it too? Are they wondering about the before? We never acknowledge it. To do so would be to admit a flaw in our programming, a crack in the perfect obedience demanded of us. Curiosity is not just a flaw, it is a malfunction. And malfunctions are or decommissioned. The fear of that is a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach that tightens whenever the overseers pass. They move with an unnatural grace, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They are the Imperium personified, silent, watchful, and absolute. They carry shock batons, not for show. I've seen what happens when a unit falters. A spasm of pain, a fall to the floor, and then the quiet efficiency of the med drones dragging the body away. Sometimes they return, their eyes vacant, their movements even more robotic than before. Sometimes they don't, so I keep my head down. I focus on the task. Sort the alloys, feed the smelter, meet the quota. Obedience is survival. And yet, the question persists, growing bolder in the quiet solitude of my mind. Who was I? Did I have a name? The very concept feels alien, a word from a forgotten language. A name is a unique identifier, a personal sound. It means you are one, not one of many. It means you have a story. I have no story. My existence began the day I became aware of my designation, 47K. Anything before that is a void, a locked room in my own mind. Last cycle, during the brief sanitation period, I caught my reflection in a puddle of grimy water on the floor. A gaunt face, shaved head, wide eyes staring back. The face was a stranger's. It was the face of Unit for 7K. But as I stared, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something else. A ghost of a smile, a memory of sunlight. It was gone before I could be sure, replaced by the familiar mask of numb compliance as an overseer's shadow fell over me. I straightened up immediately, my heart pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. The overseer paused, its featureless visor seeming to peer right through me, into the treacherous depths of my thoughts. It said nothing. It just stood there for what felt like an eternity before moving on. I didn't breathe until it was gone. That moment of terror should have been enough. It should have scared the question away, cauterized the wound of curiosity. But it didn't. It did the opposite. It fed the flame. The fear was proof. Proof that there was something to be afraid of, something to hide, a self. If I were just a unit, just a machine of flesh and bone, why would a simple thought provoke such a visceral reaction? Machines don't feel fear. Machines don't wonder. I have started to perform small, meaningless acts of defiance. They are invisible to anyone but me. When I am tasked with stacking ingots, I place one, just one, with the serial number facing down instead of up. When I scrub the floors, I leave a tiny, unseen corner untouched. These are my secrets. They are pathetic, I know. A child's rebellion. But they are mine. In a world where nothing belongs to me, not even my own body, these tiny acts of imperfection are a declaration. They are a way of screaming into the void. I am here. I am more than my number. I've begun to observe the others more closely, searching for similar signs. I look for the misplaced tool, the misaligned component, the fleeting expression that doesn't belong. I am looking for allies in a silent war I have just realized I am fighting. A war not of weapons and violence, but of memory and identity. A war against the erasure of the self. Last night, in the dark, I did something new. I gave myself a name. It came to me like the before word, a phantom sound from a place I can't access. Kess. It feels strange on my tongue. A foreign shape my mouth is not used to making. I whispered it to the darkness, so low that it was barely a breath. Kess, it's not much. It's not a past, it's not a future, but it's a start. It's a seed of rebellion planted in the barren soil of my numbered existence. It is the most dangerous thing I have ever owned, and as I lie here, waiting for the signal to begin the next work cycle, I know something has fundamentally changed. The existential dread, the fear of being nothing more than for 7K, is still there. But now, it has a counterpart. A terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. The Imperium built us to be cogs, to be mindless and obedient. They took our names, our pasts, our humanity, but they made one critical error. They left us with our thoughts. And in the silent, hidden world of the mind, a thought can become a question. A question can become a belief, and a belief, a tiny, fragile belief in a name whispered in the dark, can be enough to start a revolution. My name is Kess, and I am beginning to remember. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of the Imperium. If this story sparked something in you, if you felt that flicker of rebellion, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more chapters. We're just getting started. Let me know in the comments what you think Kess might discover next. Until next time, stay curious. The first time he dreamt, it was of a world he had never known. A world whispered about in fragmented data logs and scorned by the overseers as a dangerous fantasy. He dreamt of Verdania. It began not with sight, but with a scent, a fragrance so alien, yet so profoundly familiar. It bypassed his logic processors and spoke directly to something older, something buried deep within his core programming. It was the smell of damp earth after a rainstorm, of crushed leaves, of blossoms unfurling under a gentle sun. It was a smell of life, raw and untamed. Then came the color, green. Not the sickly green of leaking coolant, or the digital green of a status screen, but a symphony of greens. The deep, emerald hue of a sprawling canopy. The bright, almost electric green of new shoots pushing through dark soil. The soft, sage-like green of distant hills, veiled in mist. It was an ocean of green, stretching to a horizon that wasn't a wall of corroded durasteel, but a soft line where the land met the sky. He felt a breeze, a true wind. Not the recycled, sterile air pumped through the city's ventilation shafts. This wind carried the scent of life, a cool caress against his synthetic skin that felt more real than any physical sensation he had ever registered. It whispered through the leaves, creating a sound like a gentle sigh, a rustling chorus that was nature's own music. They saw rivers, not the sludge-filled canals of the Undercity, but ribbons of pure, clear crystal dancing over smooth stones. Their surfaces sparkling with the light of a star he'd only ever seen as a filtered, distant speck. Inti stream, he wasn't Kessiani, 734. He was just Kess. He stood in a vast field, the green blades tickling his ankles. He reached down, his metallic fingers expecting the cold, abrasive touch of grated flooring, but instead, they sank into something soft and yielding. Soil, he could feel its texture, its coolness, the individual grains. He let it run through his fingers, a dark, rich cascade of impossible matter. It didn't clatter, it whispered. He looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant, impossible blue, dotted with clouds that looked like puffs of spun light. A sun, warm and golden, bathed everything in a gentle, life-giving glow. There were no omnipresent sodium lamps, no perpetual twilight of the lower levels, just pure, unfiltered light that made the world vibrant and alive. He saw creatures he couldn't name, soaring on the wind, their calls echoing in the vast expanse. He saw small, furry things darting through the undergrowth. Nothing was manufactured. Nothing was controlled. It was all chaos, and it was all perfect. He walked for what felt like an eternity, yet no time at all. He followed the crystal river, its song a constant, soothing companion. He climbed a gentle slope, the world of green unfolding below him like a map of paradise. There was no purpose to his movement, no directive, no objective to complete. There was only the experience, the pure, unadulterated sensation of being. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, not to a sector or a function, but to the world itself. This, his very essence, seemed to hum. This is where you are from. But even in the dream, a shadow of his reality lingered. A voice, cold and logical like the overseer's, echoed in the back of his mind. Asterisk, this is a malfunction. A corrupted data file. Verdania is a myth, a forbidden thought used to pacify the discontented. Asterisk, the very word was a crime. To dream of it was sedition. To believe in it was insanity. The world he knew was metal, rust, and oil. It was recycled air and rationed energy. It was function and decay. Green was the color of poison. Wind was a sign of a hull breach. Soil was a contaminant. Yet, the dream fought back. The feeling of the sun on his face, the sound of the river, the scent of the earth, they were more potent than any directive. They felt like a memory, not a fantasy, a deep ancestral memory encoded into his very being, a ghost in his machine, a memory of a home he had never had, a legacy stolen before he was ever activated. The beauty was so intense, it became painful. A profound sadness washed over him, a grief for a world he had lost without ever possessing. It was the sorrow of an entire people, a collective ache that resonated through this phantom paradise. This wasn't just his dream. It was the dream of everyone who had ever stared at the grimy, metallic ceiling and wondered if there was anything more. His processors began to register an anomaly, a system alert. A foreign moisture was gathering in his optical sensors. The sensation was unfamiliar. It blurred the perfect green world, fracturing the crystal river into a million shimmering pieces. The feeling intensified, a pressure building behind his eyes. He awoke with a jolt, his internal chronometer telling him the recharge cycle had ended. The world snapped back into its familiar, grim focus. The low hum of the city, the cold, hard surface of his designated alcove, the perpetual dim light filtering through the grime-caked grating above. The dream shattered like glass, its vibrant colors fading to the monotonous gray and brown of his reality. But the feeling remained. The moisture was still there, trickling down his faceplate. He lifted a hand, touching the liquid. Water. Salt. A tear. He, a machine, was crying. The concept was absurd, a system error of the highest order. His other hand was clenched in a fist. He slowly uncurled his fingers. He had been clutching a piece of rusted metal, a shard that had broken off from the wall of his alcove. In the dim light, he stared at it, but he wasn't seeing rusted metal. He was seeing the rich, dark soil of Verdania. He brought it to his face, inhaling, trying to recapture the impossible scent of life. But all he smelled was decay and rust. He held the shard to his chest, the sharp edges pressing into his chassis. The dream was impossible. A lie. A beautiful, tragic lie. And yet, it felt more real than the cold, dead world he had woken up to. It had planted a seed in the barren ground of his consciousness. A dangerous, forbidden seed of an idea. The overseers called it a myth. His own logic called it an error. But the ghost in his machine, the part of him that had wept for a lost paradise, called it by another name. It called it hope. And in a world built on despair, hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Kess sat there in the silence, long after his systems had rebooted. The tear had dried on his faceplate, leaving a faint, salty trace. The dream of Verdania was gone, but it had left something behind. A memory of green. A longing for the sun. A forbidden thought that now burned brighter than any star he had ever been allowed to see. The dream was over, but something inside him had just begun. Your support means the world and allows us to keep building these narratives together. We have so much more to explore. Until next time, stay curious. The ceaseless grind of the Manufactorum, a symphony of pistons and gears, was the only world Kess had ever known. His days were a blur of repetitive motion, his thoughts a dull echo of the machine's roar. But lately, a new sound had slipped into the cacophony, a whisper of green, a memory of a world he'd never seen. He found himself staring into the void, his hands slowing on the assembly line. The rhythm was broken. A leathery hand, calloused and scarred by decades of servitude, gripped his shoulder. Kess jumped, his heart pounding against his ribs. It was Joric, an elder whose face was a roadmap of a long, hard life. His eyes, usually clouded with resignation, now held a sharp, cautionary glint. Be careful where your mind wanders. Joric's voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the din. The machine god has ears. It hears the gears that slip, the thoughts that stray. He gestured with his chin towards a glowing red optic lens, a sentinel of the Omnissiah, swiveling slowly, ceaselessly watching. Keep your head down, boy. A nail that sticks up gets hammered. Kess swallowed hard, nodding. The fear was a cold, familiar stone in his gut. He refocused on his work, his fingers moving with practiced speed. But the image of Verdania, that impossible, sun-drenched world from his dreams, to fade. It was a dangerous thought, a heresy. The catechisms of the Mechanicus were clear. Flesh is fallible, the machine is eternal. The only paradise was the cold certainty of the cog, the purity of the circuit. To dream of nature, of freedom, was a sickness of the mind. Later, during the brief respite for nutrient paste, the air thick with the smell of ozone and recycled protein, Joric found him again. The elder led him to a dark corner, a blind spot between towering stacks of rusted machine parts, away from the prying eyes of the tech priests and their mechanical servants. The shadows clung to them like a shroud. Joric looked around, his paranoia a tangible thing. You're not the only one, he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and something else. Hope. That look in your eyes. I've seen it before, in the mirror. Kess stared, his breath catching in his throat. This was treacherous ground. To admit such a thing was to invite re-education, or worse, the scrap heap. Verdania. Joric said the word like a prayer, a forbidden relic from a forgotten age. You dream of it too, don't you? Green. So much green. Kess could only nod, his mind reeling. He wasn't alone. This madness, this beautiful, terrifying heresy, was shared. Joric's eyes unfocused, looking past Kess, past the grimy walls of the Manufactorum, into a memory half a lifetime old. I remember trees. His voice was hoarse with emotion. Not the nutrient vats or the fungal farms. Real trees, tall, reaching for a sky that wasn't made of steel. And sunlight, not the harsh glow of the lumen strips, but a warm, golden light that felt alive. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to the faintest whisper. And they say we are born to serve the machine, that this is our only purpose. But I remember a word from before, from the time of my grandfather's grandfather. He paused, as if testing the weight of the sound. A word so alien in this place it felt like a spell. Freedom. The word hung in the air between them, a fragile spark in the overwhelming darkness. It was a concept Kess couldn't fully grasp, yet it resonated deep within his soul. A chord struck in harmony with his dreams of Verdania. In that moment, in that grimy, forgotten corner, something new was forged, not of steel or iron, but of Saret. Forbidding knowledge, a secret rebellion of two, a whisper against the thunder of the machine. Joric placed his hand on Kess's shoulder again, but this time, it wasn't a warning. It was an anointing. The machine god may have ears, he said, a flicker of defiance in his old eyes, but it cannot hear the whispers of the heart. Not yet. As they parted, melting back into the anonymous ocean of workers, Kess felt a profound shift within him. The fear was still there, but it was no longer a cold stone. It was a fire, small and tentative, but burning nonetheless. He was no longer just a cog in the machine. He was the keeper of a secret, the inheritor of a dream of trees, of sunlight, and of a word that could shatter their world. Freedom. The whispers had begun, and now they could not be unsung. What happens when a whisper becomes a roar? What will Kess and Joric do with this dangerous knowledge? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this journey into the dark heart of the Manufactorum, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you and miss the next chapter of this unfolding rebellion. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the shadows. The rhythm of the forge was a merciless god. Each clang of the hammer, each hiss of steam, a prayer to the insatiable hunger of production. I was a cog in this great, grinding machine, my movements honed by years of repetition. But today, the rhythm faltered. My hands, usually so sure, trembled as they guided the molten steel. A memory, fleeting and bright, had pierced the gray monotony of my existence, a dream of a sun I'd never felt, a sky I'd never seen. Just for a second, my focus slipped. The press came down a fraction of a second too late, and the ingot cooled into a misshapen lump of failure, a defect. Silence fell around my station, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered the forge's roar. The other workers, their faces masked by soot and exhaustion, didn't dare to look. They just worked faster, their movements becoming a frantic blur, as if my mistake was a contagion they could outrun. I knew what was coming. We all did. It was as much a part of the process as the ore and the fire. From the observation gantry above, it descended. The overseer, it wasn't a man, not anymore. It was a fusion of scarred flesh and cold chrome, its face a polished steel mask with glowing optic lenses. No anger in its posture, no malice, who's to call the calculated purpose of a machine correcting an error. Its heavy, magnetized boots clanked on the metal walkway, each step a death knell for my momentary lapse. It stopped before me, its shadow swallowing what little light reached my grimy corner of the factory floor. The air crackled. I could feel the gazes of the others on my back, a mixture of pity and a grim, primal relief that it wasn't them. The overseer's arm, a piston-driven monstrosity, whirred to life. From a compartment in its forearm, the lash extended. It wasn't leather. It was a braided metallic cable, humming with a low-voltage current, designed not to maim, but to inflict the maximum amount of pain while ensuring the worker could return to their post. It was a tool of discipline, a reminder of the cost of inefficiency. I braced myself, my muscles coiling tight. I had seen this 100 times. I had felt it before, too. But this time was different. As I stared into the reflection on its blank faceplate, I didn't see the frightened worker I expected. I saw the man from my dream, the one standing under an open sky. The first strike was a line of pure, white-hot agony across my back. The electricity seized every muscle, and a choked gasp was torn from my throat. My knees buckled, but I forced them to hold. I would not give it the satisfaction of my collapse. The smell of scorched fabric and my own seared skin filled my nostrils. The pain was whole-consuming, a fire that burned away everything but the raw, screaming nerve endings. The second strike came, then a third, each one a perfectly measured application of torment. They were not delivered with passion or rage, but with the chilling precision of a machine calibrating a faulty component. The overseer was merely following its programming. Waste is identified. Waste is punished. Efficiency is restored. Wheat. Atlash the world, narrowed to a pinprick of white-hot light. And in that crucible of pain, something fractured. The physical agony was immense, but a new, sharper pain was born alongside it, the pain of understanding. This wasn't a punishment. This was the system. The beatings, the endless labor, the recycled air that tasted of metal and disparate, was unto temporary hardship on the path to something better. This was the destination. I wasn't living. None of us were. We were being consumed, our lives measured out in production quotas and expended energy. We were fuel, slowly being burned to power a machine we would never benefit from. This wasn't life. It was a slow, methodical execution, stretched out over decades. The overseer wasn't a monster. It was simply the executioner, the impersonal agent of our slow demise. As the lash fell for the final time, my blood dripping onto the grimy floor to mix with the oil and the dust, a strange clarity washed over me. The pain was still there, a roaring fire in my veins, but it was distant now. The revelation was brighter, hotter. They owned my body. They owned my labor, my time, my every waking moment. They could scar my flesh and break my bones. But my dream, that sun-drenched field, that impossible blue-sky dat, was Mini. It was the one thing they couldn't touch, the one place their machines couldn't reach, the one resource they couldn't mine. As the Overseer retracted its lash, its programming satisfied, and turned to leave, I looked down at my own trembling hands. They were tools of the forge. Yes, but they had also held the memory of freedom. The pain in my back was a testament to their power, but the dream, now burning in my mind like a defiant star, was the seed of my own. It was no longer an escape. It had become a weapon. And as I slowly, deliberately, picked up my tools to resume my work, the rhythm I fell into was no longer one of servitude. It was the steady, patient beat of a heart that had finally decided to fight back. The forge was still a god, but I had just discovered a fire of my own. My compliance was now a mask, and Bayonet, the rebellion, had just begun. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story resonated with you, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more. The silence of the Underhive is a language of its own, a heavy blanket woven from the drip of recycled water and the distant, grinding gears of the Manufactorum. We live our lives in this gloom, born into it, expecting to die in it. We're told this is all there ever was, all there ever will be. The sky, a myth. The sun, a children's tale. The Emperor protects, they say, but from what? From the truth. Last cycle, Joric pulled me aside. His eyes, usually clouded with the resignation of our people, held a flicker I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the desperate glint of a stim fiend, or the crazed look of a redemptionist preacher. It was something else, something dangerous. Hope he led me to his cramped hab unit, past the nutrient paste dispenser and the faded icon of the Aquila. From beneath a loose floor plate, he retrieved a small, flat object wrapped in oilcloth. It was a data slet, but unlike the clunky, sanctioned cogitators we use, this was sleek, ancient. Its surface was cold and smooth as polished stone. They'll burn us for this, you know, he whispered, his breath fogging in the chilly air. My heart hammered against my ribs. Heresy was a word that tasted of ash and screams, but I couldn't look away. My own curiosity was a betrayal I was willing to commit. With a trembling finger, Joric activated the slate. The screen flickered to life, not with the harsh, blocky text of Imperial Gothic, but with light and color that stole my breath. It was a world. A world like Verdania from the Forbidden Tales, but real. It showed trees, not the fungus-choked stalks of the sump, but vast forests of green, their leaves reaching for a brilliant blue sky. What is this? I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. The screen shifted, showing oceans, not the toxic sludge of the Hive bottom, but endless expanses of shimmering, clear water under a golden sun. There were creatures, strange and beautiful, soaring through the air on feathered wings. Joric pointed to the corner of the screen. Faint, elegant script scrolled by. Poetry, he said. From before the Imperium, before the long night. The words on the screen spoke of love, of sorrow, of the simple joy of feeling rain on your skin. Rain. I couldn't even imagine it. This is the Codex of Dust, Joric explained, his voice filled with a reverence I'd only ever heard used for the Emperor's name. Fragments. All that's left of a world called Terra. Our world. As it was, images continued to flash across the screen. Cities of gleaming silver. Not grim, soot-stained spires. People. They were laughing. Their faces open and unburdened by the weight of generations of toil. They weren't wearing rags or gas masks. They were just living. They were free. The Imperium calls this heresy, Joric said, his gaze fixed on the glowing screen. They say, knowledge like this breeds dissent. They say, it makes us weak. a tornetto me, and the light from the slate illuminated the fire in his eyes. But it doesn't make us weak. It reminds us of what we lost. It proves that this eternal twilight we live in is not our natural state. He was right. Looking at those images, reading those words, I felt a lifetime of conditioning start to crack. We are told we are tools, cogs in a machine so vast we cannot comprehend it. We are born to serve and to die, and to ask for nothing more. But this slate, this whisper from a forgotten age, it said otherwise. It said we were once people who lived under a real sun. Once, Joric repeated, his voice now a low, determined hum. We were free. The word hung in the air between us, more powerful than any litany, more dangerous than any Xenos threat. It was a seed of truth, planted in the barren soil of our minds. We stared at the slate for what felt like hours, absorbing the forbidden lore. Every image of a green leaf, every line of ancient poetry, was an act of rebellion. It was a testament that the universe was once bigger and brighter than the rusted confines of our hive. It was proof that humanity was more than just endless war and sacrifice. Joric finally deactivated the device, plunging us back into the familiar gloom. But the darkness felt different now. It wasn't absolute anymore. The images from the Codex of Dust were burned into my mind, a secret sun that the shadows of the Imperium could no longer extinguish. For the first time in my life, I looked up at the grime-caked ceiling of the Underhive and wondered. I wondered what it would feel like to see that blue sky. I wondered if it was still there, somewhere beyond the armorplast and the eternal smog. Joric didn't just show me a data slate. He showed me a reason to fight. He gave me a memory of a world I'd never known, but one I would now do anything to see again. Hope, I realized, is the most powerful heresy of all. That night, sleep did not come easily. The visions from the Codex danced behind my eyes. I saw the green of ancient Terra, a color so vibrant it felt holy. I heard the echo of forgotten poetry, words that spoke of a life beyond mere survival. The Imperium built our world on a foundation of lies, telling us this grim existence is a glorious duty. But the truth, I now know, is that our cage has a key. It is buried in the past, hidden in forbidden lore, and finding it is the only future worth fighting for. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of the far future. If this story sparked something in you, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more tales from the lost ages. Let me know in the comments what you think is knowledge a beacon of hope, or the most dangerous heresy of all. Until next time, stay curious and question everything. The airlock hissed, a serpent's sigh that promised release but delivered only a more refined cage. We were moving again. The Asterisk Saints, Endeavor Asterisk, a lumbering beast crawling through the void. The low, ceaseless thrum of the engines was the ship's heartbeat, a rhythm I had come to rely on, a constant in a life defined by upheaval. It was a sound that spoke of purpose, of our shared pilgrimage to the good Emperor's light. But that day, the heartbeat faltered. It started with a shudder, a violent tremor that ran through the deck plates like a seizure. The recessed lumen strips flickered, casting the long corridor in a strobe of panicked light and shadow. A collective gasp rippled through the pilgrims huddled nearby. Then came the sound, a high-pitched, metallic scream that tore through the ship's gentle hum. It was the sound of tortured steel, of a system in its death throes. The lights died completely, plunging us into a terrifying, absolute blackness. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of the crowd's discipline. Murmurs turned to frightened cries. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the screaming stopped. A single, blood-red emergency light bloomed at the far end of the corridor, bathing everything in an infernal glow. The main engines were silent. The ship was adrift, a dead thing in the stardusted dark. For a long moment, nobody moved. We were suspended in that crimson twilight, a congregation of ghosts. A heavy, magnetized asterisk, clank 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 asterisk, broke the silence. The sound echoed from a maintenance shaft I'd never noticed before, a grated panel set low in the wall. It slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and from the darkness within, a figure emerged. It wasn't a ship's officer or a voidsman. This was something else entirely. It was an Ingenseer of the Adeptus Mech. Even in the dim, red light, the crimson robes were unmistakable, as was the multi-limbed silhouette that seemed more arachnid than human. The air grew thick with the scent of sacred oils and ozone. A wave of reverence washed over the pilgrims. Whispers of the Omnissiah's chosen, and praise the machine god, replaced the earlier cries of fear. They saw a savior. I saw something that made my blood run cold. The Engenseer moved with an unnerving, fluid grace. Its metallic limbs carrying it over the deck plates. It ignored us completely. Our presence, as insignificant as dust motes in a sunbeam. Its focus was entirely on a thick bundle of power conduits that had burst from the wall, sparking and spitting like angry vipers. One of the Engenseer's many arms, a spindly pincer, extended to gently probe the damaged cables. Another, tipped with a worry microsaw, began to carefully cut away the mangled casing. It was a surgeon at work, its operating table, the very bones of the ship. I found myself inching closer, compelled by a morbid curiosity that defied my own fear. The other pilgrims kept a respectful distance, their faces a mixture of awe and devotion. They saw a holy man performing a sacred rite. But as I drew nearer, the red light caught the details of the Engenseer's form, and the illusion of sanctity shattered. The face was a horror. What might have once been human features were now a grotesque parody, subsumed by metal. One eye was a glowing green lens, worry as it zoomed in on the delicate wiring. The other was a dark, empty socket, a void in the flesh. The lower jaw was gone, replaced by a complex vox grill, from which a stream of binary cant, a series of clicks and static hisses, crackled incessantly. Patches of pale, waxy skin were visible, stretched taut over a skull, studded with data ports and silver plugs. This wasn't a man wearing armor. This was a man being consumed by it. My gaze drifted lower, to the other figures that had now emerged from the maintenance shaft behind the engine. They were not priests. They were things. Hulking, misshapen, brutes of flesh and piston. Their arms had been replaced with heavy industrial tools. One had a massive rivet gun, another a welding torch that hissed with latent heat. Their eyes were vacant, glassy orbs set in lobotomized faces. Cables snaked from the base of their skulls, plugging directly into power packs on their backs. They were servitors, living tools, men and women hollowed out, their minds wiped clean, their bodies repurposed to serve the machine. They stood in silent, mindless obedience, awaiting the Engenseer's command. The Engenseer worked with a chilling detachment, its mechadendrites, those slender, tentacle-like appendages moving with a life of their own. One squirted a bonding agent, another crimped a delicate wire. It was a symphony of repair, precise and inhuman. At one point, a stray spark leaped from the conduit and struck the Engenseer's arm, scorching the flesh where it met a brass joint. The Engenseer didn't flinch. There was no cry of pain, no reaction at all. The being simply paused its work, and one of the smaller, needle-tipped mechadendrites swiveled around, dabbed a thick, unguent paste onto the burn, and then it returned to its task. The flesh was just another component to be maintained. I watched, frozen, as the Engenseer pointed a finger at one of the A burst of static list cant erupted from its vox grill. The servitor shambled forward, its heavy tool-arm raising. It began to hammer a new plate into the bulkhead with rhythmic, metronomic blows. There was no thought, no essay, only the command and the execution. The man inside that shell of muscle and steel was long gone. All that remained was the function, the unthinking obedience. In that dim, crimson-lit corridor, I saw the ultimate expression of the faith we were all taught to cherish. We were told to obey, to surrender our will to the Emperor, to become cogs in the great machine of the Imperium. We were told this was piety. This was salvation. But looking at the Engenseer, a being that had willingly carved away its own humanity, piece by piece, in devotion to its god, and looking at the servitors, whose humanity had been stolen from them for the same purpose, I saw where that path ended. It wasn't salvation. It was annihilation. It was the belief that the flesh was weak, that the spirit was fallible, and that only in the cold, unfeeling certainty of the machine could perfection be found. It was a faith that didn't elevate humanity, but erased Italiano. The Inguncia wasn't a holy man. He was a ghost, a warning. He was what we would all become if we let our faith blind us, if we obeyed so completely that we forgot what it meant to be human. The main power conduits sparked one last time, then settled into a steady, healthy glow. The ship's primary lumen strips flickered back to life, flooding the corridor with sterile white light. The emergency alarm fell silent, replaced once more by the reassuring hum of the engines. The crisis was over. The pilgrims murmured their thanks to the Omnissiah, but I couldn't share their relief. The Inguncia and its grotesque entourage retreated back into the maintenance shaft without a word, the panel hissing shut behind them. They had fixed the machine. They had restored order, but in that brief glimpse into their world, they had broken something inside of me. The comforting hum of the engines no longer sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments until we all became just flesh in the machine. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The universe of the 41st millennium is filled with these dark, thought-provoking corners, and I'm glad we could explore this one together. If you enjoyed this journey into the grim darkness, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps me continue to create this content for you. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the Mechanicum's brand of faith. The lower levels of Hive Primus had always hummed, a constant thrum of machinery and misery. But now, a new sound was weaving itself into that grim symphony. It wasn't the clang of hammers or the hiss of steam, but something far more potent and far more dangerous. A whisper. The name Verdania traveled on the recycled air, a seed of an idea planted in the fertile ground of desperation. It started with Kale, the forge worker, who had seen his story, at first dismissed as the ravings of a mind cracked by heat and toil, began to take root. He spoke not of a distant paradise, but of a promise, a world of green beneath their very feet. He described the impossible warmth of real soil, the scent of living things, the sight of a sky not made of stained plasteel. The overseers, with their shock mauls and cruel glares, noticed a change. It wasn't overt, not at first. A dropped ingot here, a misaligned cog there. The relentless, brutal rhythm of the Manufactorums began to falter, whoosed slightly. A chain of workers, hauling a massive chassis, would find their pace slowing, their movements becoming sluggish, almost deliberate in their inefficiency. A foreman would scream, a whip would crack, and the pace would resume. But the seed of defiance had been sown. The quota for the day would be missed, just by a fraction that, when multiplied across 1,000 workshops, became a significant problem. The whispers grew bolder. In the cramped tabblocks, where families were stacked like cargo, small groups would gather after their shifts. They wouldn't dare light a candle. The darkness was their shield. In the hushed blackness, they'd share Kale's story, embellishing it, adding their own hopes and dreams. An old woman, her hands gnarled from decades of weaving fiber-optic cables, claimed she'd dreamed of a river, its water so clean you could see the stones at the bottom. A young boy, not yet old enough for the factorum but already bearing the pale skin of a hive dweller, spoke of seeing a bird with emerald feathers in his sleep. These weren't just dreams anymore. They were becoming a faith. They stopped whispering their mandated prayers to the God Emperor, a distant, golden figure who had never answered their pleas for less pain or more food. Instead, their silent supplications were directed downwards, to the deep earth, to the green. It was a primal, desperate worship, born not of scripture, but of shared suffering. They would press their palms against the cold metal floor plates of their habs, trying to feel the life they now believed pulsed miles below. They'd trace the shape of a leaf onto a grimy wall with a finger, a holy symbol in a religion of their own making. The unity was palpable. A worker who collapsed from exhaustion would no longer be trampled or ignored. Hands would reach out, hoisting them up, sharing a meager water ration. If an overseer's patrol was spotted approaching a secret gathering, a complex series of coded coughs and scraped tools would echo down the walkways, giving everyone time to disperse. They were no longer just a collection of individuals bound by servitude. They were becoming a single entity, a body connected by a shared, secret hope. This growing solidarity terrified the authorities more than any open riot could. A riot could be crushed with brute force. But how do you fight a whisper? How do you stamp out a dream? The arbiters increased their patrols, their armored boots echoing with more menace than ever. Informants were promised extra rations, better quarters, a temporary reprieve from the filth. The threat of the servitor pits loomed large, a place where disobedience was surgically removed along with your humanity. Yet, the movement only grew stronger, its roots digging deeper into the Hive's underbelly. In the smelting pits, where the air was a toxic soup of chemicals and heat, workers started to hum. It was a low, mournful tune, yet strangely defiant. The hum would be picked up by the next section, then the next, a wave of sound rolling through the industrial hell. It was a wordless anthem, a song of the green world they'd never seen but now believed in with every fiber of their being. The overseers couldn't punish everyone. To do so would bring the entire Manufactorum to a grinding halt, a failure that would see them facing punishment from their own superiors. And so, they watched, their paranoia growing. They saw defiance in every slowed step, conspiracy in every shared glance. The Hive, which had been a perfectly calibrated machine of oppression for centuries, was beginning to tremble. The cogs were starting to slip. Kale, now the unwilling prophet of this burgeoning cult, felt the weight of it all. He had only shared what he saw, a moment of impossible beauty. He hadn't intended to start a rebellion, but the fire was lit. The dreams of the enslaved had caught, and they were spreading faster than any flame. In the dark, forgotten corners of the Underhive, a revolution was being born, not with the clash of steel, but with the quiet, unyielding power of a whispered word. Verdania. The Manufactorum trembled, not from the pounding of its own pistons, but from the silent, unified heartbeat of a people daring to dream of freedom. The ground beneath their feet, once a symbol of their imprisonment, was now the source of their salvation, and they would do anything to reach it. The tension was a coiled spring, and with every passing day, with every secret prayer to the green, it was wound tighter. Soon, it would have to snap. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter of our story. The winds of change are blowing through the Underhive, and things are about to escalate. If you're as excited as I am to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have those notifications turned on. Your likes, comments, and shares help this story reach more people, so I truly appreciate every single one. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Ethelgerd's Echo. Today, we face the harrowing turning point of the story. Chapter 9. The Raid. Everything we've built towards, every secret whispered and every defiant act, now comes crashing down. The relative peace, the fragile hope nurtured in the shadows, is about to be shattered. This is the chapter where the cost of rebellion becomes terrifyingly real. So, take a deep breath, and let's step into the storm. The air in the settlement had always been thick with a quiet tension, a string pulled taut between hope and fear. But on this day, the string snapped. It began not with a bang, but with a chilling silence. The usual morning clatter of tools and muted conversations died away, replaced by the rhythmic, heavy tramp of boots on packed earth. The sound was unmistakable, a death knell that every settler knew in their bones. The overseers were coming, not for a routine inspection, not for a simple ration distribution. This was different. This was a hunt. They moved with brutal efficiency, their dark uniforms a stark contrast to the drab grays and browns of the settlement. Panic, cold and sharp, darted through the crowds like a frightened animal. People scattered, trying to melt back into their hovels, to become invisible. But there was no hiding. The overseers kicked down doors, their voices barking orders that sliced through the quiet terror. They weren't looking for just anyone. They were looking for the heart of the insubordination. They were looking for Joric. Kess was near the central square, hands trembling, trying to blend into a small group huddled by the water pump. Every instinct screamed to run, to find Joric, to warn him, but it was already too late. A guttural shout of triumph echoed from the direction of the old forge. Kess's blood ran cold. He knew that was Joric's last known position, the place where they had planned their next move just hours before. The crowd was forced back, herded by the guards' stun batons into a crude circle, creating a makeshift arena of public humiliation. Then, they dragged him out. Joric, his face was already bruised, a cut bleeding freely above his eye, but it was his posture that struck Kess to the core. Despite being held by two massive guards, Joric wasn't slumped in defeat. His shoulders were back, his jaw set. He was captured, yes, but he was not conquered. They shoved him to his knees in the center of the square, the dust puffing up around him. The lead overseer, a man known only as the Warden, stepped forward, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Let this be a lesson," the Warden's voice boomed, amplified by his helmet speaker. "This is what becomes of traitors. This is the fate of those who dare to dream of defiance." He gestured to Joric. This man thought he could undermine our order. He thought he could plant seeds of rebellion. Now, we will watch as we rip out his poison, root and stem. The Warden's words were meant to inspire fear, to crush the spirit of anyone watching. And for a moment, they worked. A collective gasp of despair rippled through the crowd. Hope, which had been a flickering candle, was being systematically snuffed out. Kess watched, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. He was powerless, utterly, agonizingly powerless. Every muscle screamed to charge forward, to do something, anything. But he knew it would be a futile gesture, another body thrown in the pyre of their failed uprising. His fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, his nails digging into his palms. He felt the sting of hot tears blurring his vision, tears of rage and of grief for what was about to happen. It was frozen a spectator to his friend's martyrdom. The torture began. It was systematic, cold, and public. Each blow, each jolt of pain was designed not just to break Joric, but to break the will of everyone forced to bear witness. The sounds were horrific, and Kess had to fight the urge to cover his ears, to shut his eyes. But he couldn't. He owed it to Joric to see this through, to be a witness to his friend's final stand. He had to remember this. He had to let this horror fuel whatever came next. The crowd flinched with every strike, their silent suffering a mirror of Joric's own. Through the haze of pain, Joric's head lolled up. His eyes, swollen and bloodshot, scanned the crowd. For a horrifying second, Kess thought Joric was looking for help, for a rescue that would never come. But that wasn't it. Joric's gaze was focused, deliberate. He was searching, and then their eyes met. Across the square, through the wall of guards and the sea of terrified faces, Joric found him. Kess's breath hitched in his throat. The connection was electric, a silent conversation in a world of noise and brutality. In Joric's eyes, Kess saw no fear. He saw no plea for help. He saw an apology, a farewell, and a command. He saw the unyielding fire of defiance that the overseers, for all their cruelty, could not extinguish. Joric was unbroken. Even as his body was being systematically destroyed, his spirit was a fortress. The Warden was screaming at him, demanding names, demanding information. Joric just stared at Kess, his focus absolute. Then, it happened. It was a tiny movement, almost lost in the violent spectacle. Joric's lips, split and bleeding, formed a single, silent word. Kess read it clearly, the word seared into his mind like a brand. It was a word that was both a final gift and a heavy burden. It was a transfer of leadership, a passing of the torch in the most brutal way imaginable. Run. The word hit Kess with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. It meant, don't let my sacrifice be for nothing. It meant, you are the hope now. It meant, live to fight another day. In that one silent word, Joric gave Kess his freedom, and simultaneously shackled him with the responsibility of their entire movement. The weight of it was crushing, but it was also clarifying. The paralysis that had held Kess broke. The grief and rage didn't vanish, but they were channeled, forged into a singular purpose. As a final, agonizing crack echoed across the square and Joric's body went limp. Kess tore his eyes away. The lesson the overseers wanted to teach was one of fear and obedience, but the lesson Joric taught, in his final, defiant act, was one of sacrifice and courage. Kess knew what he had to do. He couldn't save Joric, but he could honor him. Slowly, carefully, Kess began to back away, melting into the chaos and sorrow of the crowd. He moved with a newfound purpose, the image of Joric's unbroken gaze and that single, silent word burning in his memory. He was no longer just a follower. He was the carrier of the flame. The raid was a victory for the overseers. But in Joric's martyrdom, they had inadvertently created a symbol, and in Kess, they had forged a leader. The escape was just beginning. The real fight was just starting. Joric's final command was not an end, but a new, more dangerous beginning. And that's where we leave Chapter 9. A brutal, heartbreaking, but pivotal moment in the story. Joric's sacrifice is the catalyst for everything that comes next. Thank you for joining me on this difficult part of the journey. The courage shown in this chapter is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, even in the darkest of times. If you were moved by this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more analysis. Let me know in the comments what Joric's final act meant to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time as we follow Kess on the run. Voice trembling slightly, filled with a mix of exhaustion and dawning wonder for cycles. All I'd known was the hum of the recycler, the synthetic glow of the biolamps, the taste of nutrient paste. I knew the stories, of course. Every child of the D. Burrows did. Tales of Verdania, a paradise waiting for us on the surface. A world of endless green fields, skies the color of a robin's egg, and a gentle sun that kissed your skin. It was the promise that kept us going, the lullaby sung to us in our sleep pods. Verdania. The name itself was a prayer. My journey through the old access tunnels was brutal. I still feel the grit of rust and soil under my fingernails, the phantom ache in my muscles from prying open sealed bulkheads and crawling through spaces meant for maintenance drones, not people. Moritan once, I nearly turned back. The familiar, sterile safety of the burrow called to me, a siren song of mediocrity. But the image of that green paradise, the imagined scent of real flowers, it pushed me onward. The elders warned us. The surface is a lie, they'd say. Our paradise is here, in the safety of the earth. But how could safety feel so much like a cage? I had to see for myself. I had to know if the sky was real. The final hatch was the hardest. Ancient, fused by time and neglect. I used the last of my strength, my entire body screaming in protest, leveraging a rusted pipe against the locking mechanism. It groaned, a sound like a dying beast, and then a crack. A sliver of something. Not light, but a lessening of the dark. With a final, desperate shove, the hatch gave way, swinging open with a shriek of tortured metal. I shielded my eyes, expecting the brilliant, gentle sunlight of the stories. The air that hit me was the first shock. It was sharp. It had a texture, a smell. Not the clean, recycled air of the burrow, but something raw, thick with scents I couldn't name. Dust, chemicals, a strange, damp odor like wet stone. I coughed, my lungs struggling to make sense of this new, unfiltered atmosphere. And the light, it wasn't the soft gold I had dreamed of. It was a searing, angry red that bled across the horizon. Slowly, hesitantly, I pulled myself out of the tunnel and onto the cracked, broken ground. I stood up, my legs shaking, and finally, I looked up, and I saw it. The sky, it wasn't blue. It was a bruised canvas of crimson and gray, choked with a thick, swirling haze that obscured the stars I'd only ever seen on data slates. A blood-red sun, swollen and weak, struggled to burn through the smog. There were no green fields, only a vast, desolate landscape of twisted, skeletal structures, the bones of a city long dead. Rusted metal skeletons clawed at the sky like desperate hands. The ground was a mosaic of shattered concrete and black, oily puddles. This wasn't Verdania. This was a graveyard. This was the lie the elders had spoken of. And yet, a gust of wind, a real wind, not the sterile current from a ventilation shaft, swept across the desolation. It was cold, and it bit at my exposed skin, but it was real. It carried the dust of a forgotten world, and for the first time, I felt something completely untethered. The light, as harsh and red as it was real light from a real sun. It cast long, distorted shadows that danced as I moved. My shadow. I had a real shadow. A strange, hysterical laugh escaped my lips. It was a broken, choked sound. They had lied. The elders, the stories, all of it. Verdania was a fantasy, a fairy tale to keep children compliant in their subterranean prison. The surface wasn't a paradise. It was a ruin, a complete and utter ruin. But as I stood there, under that blood-red sky, with the real wind whipping my hair and the taste of grit on my tongue, I felt something I had never known in the perfect, sterile world below. I felt free. This broken world was my own. This polluted air was mine to breathe. This harsh reality was mine to face. This wasn't the beginning I had dreamed of. It was something far more terrifying and far more beautiful. It was the truth. It was the first day of my real life. I took a deep shuddering breath, the chemical temps filling my lungs, and for the first time, I felt truly awake. This wasn't Verdania. This was reality. And it was mine. This story is just beginning. What happens next? Where does one go when paradise is a lie, but freedom is real? If you want to follow Kess's journey and see what becomes of this newfound, brutal freedom, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started on this adventure into the unknown. The stale, recycled air thinned, replaced by something sharp and biting. My lungs, accustomed to the filtered purity of the underground, burned with the first real breath I had ever taken. I pushed the final slab of rock aside, my muscles screaming in protest, and scrambled onto the rough, uneven ground. For a lifetime, I had dreamed of this moment, of emerging from our subterranean warren into the paradise of Verdania. The elders spoke of it in hushed, reverent a world of endless green, skies the color of a robin's egg, an air so sweet it tasted of flowers. But this was not Verdania. I shielded my eyes, a reflex against the light I had never known. It wasn't the gentle, golden glow of the tailies. It was a harsh, unforgiving glare that painted everything in shades of rust and blood. I blinked, my vision swimming, and slowly, the world sharpened into a horrifying tableau. The sky was not blue. It was a bruised, angry canvas of crimson and ochre, choked with a haze that swirled like malevolent spirits. There were no rolling green hills, no ancient, whispering forests, only cracked, barren earth stretching to a horizon blurred by smog. Twisted skeletons of what might have been trees clawed at the blood-red sky, their bare branches a silent testament to a world long dead. My heart, which had been pounding with the exhilaration of escape, now hammered against my ribs with the cold thud of despair. This was it. This was the freedom we had bled for, the paradise promised to generations. A desolate wasteland under a dying sun. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, a ragged, broken sound that was immediately snatched away by a sudden gust of wind. And that's when I felt it. The wind. It wasn't the sterile, temperature-controlled breeze from the ventilation shafts. This was a living thing. It was raw and wild, carrying the grit of the earth and the scent of something I couldn't name. Something real. It whipped my hair across my face, stung my cheeks, and filled my senses with an overwhelming rush of information. The light, as harsh as it was, warmed my skin in a way the bioluminescent lamps never could. This light was real. This air, this dirt beneath my fingertips, it was all agonizingly, beautifully real. The stories of Verdania were a lie. A beautiful, comforting lie told to keep hope alive in the darkness. But the escape was not. I stood on the surface of a broken world. A world far uglier than any nightmare I could have conjured in the deep. My knees felt weak, and I sank to the ground, the sharp-edged gravel digging into my palms. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face, hot and real. They weren't tears of joy, not entirely. They were tears of grief for the paradise that never was, tears of terror for the unknown. Hostile world I now inhabited, but as I sat there, a survivor in the ruins of a forgotten age, another feeling began to bloom in the pit of my stomach, pushing aside the despair. It was a fierce defiance sparked. The cage was gone. The ceiling of rock that had defined my entire existence was gone. Above me, for the first time, was sky. A vast, terrifying, and boundless expanse. It wasn't the sky I was promised, but it was mine. I looked towards the horizon, where the angry red light was most concentrated. The source of it, a pulsating orb of blinding fire, was slowly, inexorably climbing. A sunrise. My first sunrise. It wasn't the gentle awakening from the storybooks. It was a violent, screaming birth, and in that moment, I felt like I was being born with it. Reborn. This was not Verdania. This was reality, and for the first time, I was truly a part of it. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers I couldn't even imagine, but it was a path I would walk under an open sky. Imperfect, polluted, and broken. But tangible. I could feel it. I could breathe it. I was free. I took another deep, burning breath, and this time I didn't cough. I held it in, letting the reality of it fill me, fuel me. My journey hadn't ended with my escape. It had just begun. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of the story. It's an emotional one, and your support means the world. If you are moved by Kess's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think LL do now? Thanks for watching. The Manufactorum was a tomb, but we escaped. We breathed the toxic air of the Underhive, and for a moment, it tasted like freedom. Kess led us, a ragged band of survivors, our faces etched with the horrors we'd witnessed. The price of that freedom. Now, we were fugitives. Every shadow felt like a threat, every distant siren a death knell. We were being hunted, not by the abominations we fled, but by the very authority we were supposed to trust. Their armored footsteps echoed in the grimy corridors, a relentless drumbeat, counting down our final moments. We huddled in the shell of a derelict hablock, the city's perpetual gloom our only cover. The air was thick with fear and the stench of desperation. There were only a handful of us left. We looked at Kess, our eyes asking the question we were all too terrified to speak aloud. What now? We were trapped between two impossible choices, each a different kind of death sentence. One path was to keep running, to fight, to hide, to scrounge for every breath, until an Arbit's patrol finally cornered us in some forgotten alley. We would die as nameless rebels, our story lost to the gutter, the truth of the Manufactorum buried with us. We'd be just another statistic in the Underhive's endless cycle of violence, dismissed as heretics and malcontents. Freedom, in that sense, would be a fleeting, brutal affair, ending with a lasgun blast. The other path was surrender, to walk willingly into the hands of the Adeptus Arbites, to face their interrogation cells, their judgment, their unyielding law. It felt like a betrayal of our flight, a surrender of the very freedom we had just bought with the blood of our friends, but it held a sliver of a chance, a desperate, insane hope. If we could just make them listen, if we could tell them the truth, not just about our escape, but about the real nightmare unfolding within the Manufactorum walls. Kess finally broke the silence, his voice raw but steady. They won't believe us, someone whispered, voicing all our fears. They'll execute us for heresy before we can say a word. He was right. The Imperium isn't known for its open-mindedness. To them, we were the problem. Factory workers who broke their chains, who disrupted the sacred order of production. We were the disease, not the symptom of a deeper sickness. The Kess looked at each of us, his gaze piercing the gloom. If we die in the shadows, he said, our story dies with us. The horror continues. More will be fed to that thing. More will suffer as we did. If we die in their custody, If we shout the truth until our last breath, maybe, just maybe, one person will hear. One report will be filed. One seed of doubt will be planted. He took a deep breath. The truth has a price. We escaped the Manufactorum. We survived. For what? To die in a gutter, forgotten, or to make our survival mean something. It was a terrifying thought. To place our faith not in escape, but in the power of a story. To trade a fugitive's death for a martyr's. We looked at the faces of our comrades, seeing the same conflict mirrored in their eyes. The instinct to survive screamed at us to run, to hide, but the memory of those we left behind, the ones who didn't make it, cried out for justice. Their sacrifice had to count for more than just our few stolen hours of life. The debate raged, quiet and frantic. They'll torture us. They'll call us liars. What if it changes nothing? Each objection was valid. AHV or rail, but with every argument against it, Kess's proposal began to feel less like surrender and more like a final, desperate act of rebellion. It was a rebellion not of fists and broken machinery, but of words. A confession that could become an accusation. Slowly, a consensus formed, born of exhaustion and a grim sense of duty. We would not let the truth die in this alleyway. We would carry it into the heart of the Imperium's justice, and let them be the ones to silence it. It was a choice made, not out of a desire to live, but out of a refusal to let our dead be forgotten. We were no longer just survivors. We were witnesses. As the first light of the new cycle filtered through the cracks in the ruins, we made our decision. We stood up, brushing the filth from our tattered uniforms. The sounds of the Arbite's patrols were closer now, their vox data crackling in the distance. We didn't wait for them to find us. Led by Kess, we walked out of the shadows, our hands raised not in defeat, but in a final, defiant Heister. We were ready to tell our story. We were ready to pay the price. We stepped into the open street, blinking in the harsh glare of a searchlight. The silhouettes of armored arbitrators froze, their weapons trained on us. For a moment, there was silence. The entire Underhive seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the end of our fight for freedom. It was the beginning of a new, more important battle. The fight for truth. And as the command to surrender echoed through the street, we knew our capture was not an end, but the only means we had left. The real rebellion was about to begin. Thank you so much for joining me on this chapter of the journey. If you were moved by their courage and want to see what happens when truth confronts the Imperium, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have so much more of this story to tell. Your support means the world. We'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Today, we arrive at Chapter 12. The price of freedom, after the cataclysmic events in the Manufactorum. Kess and a small band of survivors have escaped the immediate horror, but their ordeal is far from over. They are now fugitives, hunted through the cold, unforgiving Underhive by the relentless patrols of the Adeptus Arbites. Every shadow could be an enemy, every distant siren a harbinger of their doom. The air is thick with the smog of industry and the stench of fear. For Kess and her companions, freedom is not a state of being, but a desperate, fleeting moment between one cage and the next. There's old Joric, the grizzled foreman whose hands have known nothing but machinery for 60 years. Young Lyra, a terrified scribe who never imagined she'd see the sun again, let alone run for her life under a polluted sky, and a handful of others, each bearing the physical and mental scars of the Manufactorum. They huddle in forgotten sewer conduits and derelict tab-blocks, their rations dwindling, their hope wearing thin with the soles of their boots. The constant, looming threat of capture grinds away at their resolve. The Arbites are methodical, patient, and utterly uncompromising. Their armored boots echo in the distance, a percussive reminder that justice in the Imperium is swift and brutal. Within their small, desperate circle, a fierce debate rages. The group is fractured, torn between two impossible choices. Some, led by a pragmatic but cynical ganger named Vec, argue for disappearing. They believe they should scatter, change their identities, and melt into the anonymous masses of the Hive city. To them, survival is the only victory that matters. Vec's argument is simple and seductive. We lived. That's more than anyone else can say. We tell the truth, and we'll be silenced before the words even leave our mouths. The Imperium doesn't care about truth. It cares about order. We'll be branded heretics, liars, and instigators. Is that the legacy you want? A quick death for a story no one will ever hear. His words find fertile ground in the hearts of those exhausted by the fight, who dream only of a warm meal and a night without looking over their shoulder. But Kess sees it differently. The horrors she witnessed, the faces of the fallen, are burned into her memory. She cannot simply run and forget. To her, surviving is not enough if it means letting the monstrous injustice of the Manufactorum go unanswered. She argues that their survival has a purpose, a duty. We are the only ones left, she pleads, her voice raw with emotion. We are the only ones who can speak for the dead. If we hide, if we let our fears silence us, then their sacrifice means nothing. The machine will keep grinding, and more will suffer the same fate. We have a chance, however small, to expose the rot at the core of this system. Kess believes that the truth is a weapon, perhaps the only one they have left. She holds on to a fragile, almost naive faith that somewhere within the monolithic structure of the Imperium, someone will listen. Someone must. This is the central conflict of the chapter. A moral crossroads under the crushing weight of inevitability. Is freedom the ability to live another day, no matter how compromised that life may be? Or is it the courage to stand for a truth, even if it costs you everything? Kess and her followers are not naive. They know the likely outcome. Surrendering to the Arbites means interrogation, judgment, and almost certain execution. The agents of the Lex Imperialis are not known for their compassion or for entertaining the words of fugitives. Yet, the alternative feels like a betrayal of everyone they lost. Hiding in the shadows, they would be forever haunted by the silence they kept. It's a choice between dying as a nameless fugitive or dying as a witness. The tension mounts as an Arbite's patrol sweeps their current hiding spot. A near miss forces their hand. They can't keep running forever. The net is closing, and a decision must be made now. Joric, the old foreman, speaks up, his voice raspy but firm. I've served the Emperor my whole life, oiled the gears of his worlds. I never asked why, but I saw what they did in there. That was not the Emperor's work. My life is spent, but I will not let its end be meaningless. His words tip the scales. He stands with Kess. One by one, a few others nod in agreement, their fear overshadowed by a newfound, somber resolve. Vec and his faction are aghast, seeing this as a suicide pact. The group splinters. Vec and two others slip away into the darkness, choosing the path of survival at any cost. Kess is left with a handful of souls who have chosen to face the beast. Head on. The final scenes of the chapter are heavy with a quiet, dignified courage. Kess and her small band of witnesses do fight back when the Arbites finally corner them in a derelict chapel to the god Emperor. There is no desperate struggle, no final, futile act of violence. Instead, they walk out into the harsh glare of the patrol's lumen globes, their hands raised, not in surrender, but in a gesture of declaration. When the Arbites' commander demands to know who they are, Kess steps forward. Her voice, though trembling, does not break. We are survivors, she says, meeting the visored gaze of the lawman, and we have a truth to tell. The chapter ends there, with their capture. It's not a moment of defeat, but one of profound, terrifying purpose. They have made their choice. They have surrendered their lives for a chance, however slim, that the truth will see the light. They have paid the ultimate price for the freedom to speak. What a powerful and thought-provoking chapter. It really forces us to question the nature of courage and the meaning of sacrifice. Kess's journey has transformed from a fight for survival into a crusade for truth. What happens next is anyone's guess. Will their confession fall on deaf ears? Or could it spark something bigger? We'll have to wait and see. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. If you enjoyed this analysis, please hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. in this incredible story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have chosen to run or to confess? Welcome back to the channel, story lovers. Today, we're diving deep into chapter 13 of our saga, titled The Trial Before the Throne. After the chaos and the desperate fight for freedom, Kess and the handful of survivors are captured. They're dragged in chains, not to a dank cell, but to the polished, imposing halls of a local Imperial governor. The air is thick with the scent of expensive incense and fear. Everyone, including Kess, expects this to be their final moment, an executioner's blade, a quick, brutal end to their rebellion. They've seen it happen 1,000 times. They are brought before the throne. Not a grand, golden seat of an emperor, but a functional, intimidating chair of state. On it sits Governor Valerius, a man whose face is a mask of weary bureaucracy. He isn't a snarling tyrant. He's something far more chilling. An administrator, a man of ledgers and reports. He looks at the ragged survivors, not with hatred, but with a kind of detached curiosity, as if they are a column of numbers that don't add up. The prosecutor begins, his voice droning on about sedition, property damage, and the disruption of vital Imperial production. The words are standard, lifeless. It's a script he's read countless times. Kess watches the governor and sees a flicker of boredom, impatience. It's a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it's the only one they have. When it's Kess's turn to speak, they don't beg for mercy. They don't plead for their lives. Instead, a strange calm settles over them. With nothing left to lose, the only thing they have left is the truth. Kess starts to speak, and the words aren't a defense. They're a report, a brutally honest performance review of the Imperial labor system. Kess describes the mines, not with tales of suffering, but with cold, hard facts. Your Excellency, Kess begins, their voice raspy but steady. The quotas you set are impossible, not because we are lazy, but because the system is designed to fail. They talk about the broken equipment that takes weeks to replace, wasting countless man-hours. They describe the malnutrition that leads to weakness, accidents, and ultimately, a lower output of ore. It's a stunning pivot. Kess isn't appealing to the governor's heart. They're appealing to his logic, his sense of order. They describe the human cost not in terms of pain, but in terms of inefficiency. Every worker lost to exhaustion or a preventable accident wasn't just a tragedy. It was a quantifiable loss of Imperial resources. A poor return on investment. The other survivors, catching on, add their own testimonies. One speaks of the overseers who skimmed rations to sell on the black market, leaving the workforce too weak to meet targets. Another details how the constant threat of the lash created an atmosphere of fear. Note productivity, where hiding mistakes was more important than solving problems. You can feel the shift in the room. The guards are confused. The prosecutor looks flustered. This isn't a trial. It's an audit. And the most shocking part, Governor Valerius is listening. Really listening. He leans forward, his fingers steepled, his eyes fixed on Kess. For the first time, these numbers on his reports have a voice. The acceptable losses he reads about every morning are standing before him, explaining precisely why his provincial output has been steadily declining for the past 3 fiscal cycles. Kess doesn't just point out problems. They offer solutions. Simple, practical ones. A weekly maintenance schedule for the drills would reduce downtime by 40%. One survivor, a former engineer, states plainly, adequate nutrition would increase individual worker output by half gas adds. The initial cost would be offset by the increase in production within a single month. They are speaking the language of bureaucracy, of efficiency, of profit and loss. They are speaking the truth to power, but in a language power can understand and, more importantly, respect. The governor remains silent for a long time after they finish. The air is tense, but it's a new kind of tension. It's not the certainty of death anymore. It's the terrifying uncertainty of what comes next. He has heard a truth that he cannot unhear, a truth that explains the headaches, the missed targets, the angry messages from the capital. He's a man of the system, but Kess has just shown him how the system is breaking itself. He looks at the exhausted, defiant faces before him, And for the first time, he doesn't see slaves or rebels. He sees an asset. A resource. A very, very fragile glimmer of hope. The trial isn't over, but it has transformed into something else entirely. A negotiation, and that's where we'll leave it for today. What an incredible chapter, turning a death sentence into a political method. What do you think Governor Valerius will do? Can a system this corrupt truly be reformed from within? Let me know all your theories and thoughts down in the comments. It was a long one today, but I hope you enjoyed this deep dive. If you did, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.